Hello everyone, how are you doing? Today I am going to show you how I painted these wonderful little Halloween vintage style ornaments. And to start out, I'm using my two-piece ornaments, although you can certainly paint them on a one-piece ornament or adapt the design to just about anything you want. But for my purposes, I am going to show how we did them on the two-piece ornaments that I offer, because a lot of people want to learn not only how to paint on MDF, these are made from 1/4-inch MDF, but also how to glue the pieces together. When I make my two-piece self-framing ornaments, I call them, I cut the inner circle on a bevel, so that instead of being flush with the ornament, it pushes back a little and catches. So the back is just a little bit proud, and the front looks like a frame. Thus the term self-framing. And this gets glued in when, I like to glue them when I'm done painting. Some painters glue them before they paint them. And yes, the backs are a little bit proud, you could see, because they slide back. But I'm going to show the basic processes for these very simple yet cute vintage ornaments. They're just plain silhouettes. There's a little bit of stenciling on them. There's a little bit of shading. They're a nice entry-level project. So if you get ready, we will start with our video. I'm going to keep cutting away a little bit at the sections so that they're not too long and that they're manageable. Okay, I'll be back in a minute when we're ready to start prepping the MDF. Alright, let's get started on how we're going to prep our surface. MDF is made basically of ground wood fibers and glue. So it's medium density fiberboard. That's what MDF stands for. And it's a real nice surface for painting because it doesn't usually warp a lot. You know, once it's sealed, it stays nice, and you can get it, it looks almost like porcelain. It has a real nice finish. And it's not subject to change as much as regular wood is in like temperature and stuff like that, and moisture. But I do like to prep it a little bit, because especially when I'm painting a design that has a lighter base, because the MDF is a brown color, if I don't bring it up to a lighter color or something neutral, it's going to dull my paint, I find. And I find it's easier to put a layer down on it before I start painting. What I've used recently that I really like to use is DecoArt's Chalky Gesso. Now this is a giant bottle. I did get it from DecoArt. I'm a helping artist, so they do send me products to use in my design work and that. But I've been with them for 20-some years, and I really do like and use their products, or I don't recommend them. And the Chalky Gesso is nice because it covers very well, and it leaves a not a gritty surface, but one with a little bit of tooth, so your paint likes to stick to it nice. So it does two jobs at once. And what I did for ease of our video is I poured some in a little dish, and I'm going to use that. And I have my water bin over here, and I like to base with the flat brush when I do this type of sealing. Now you could use sealer if you like, but I've never been a fan of sealer. I find sometimes it dries too slick, and then you don't have enough tooth to hold your paint. Before I was using the gesso, I would just use the base color of paint and put a layer or two on before I started transferring my design in that, and that did a good job too. But I'm going to show you, I'm going to wet my brush, and blot it off on a paper towel a little bit. You want your brush moist. And for my two-piece ornaments, as I said, I glue them after. So I snap them apart, and I'm going to baste just the tops of each piece. And I will go a little bit in the inside ring because that's going to show when you push down. But I won't do the edges because most of the time my edges are darker anyway, and they look better like that. So my outer edges I leave, and my inner edge here I don't want to put a lot of paint on until after I glue, because if you put too much paint on, you'll fill in this gap and you won't be able to push it back as much to glue it. And what I like to do is after it's glued, then I paint the entire back, including the edge here. So that's my method of madness anyway. So I'm going to dampen the brush, and I did get a little cup of water here too. I don't know if you could see it. It doesn't matter, but just so you know where I'm dipping. I'm going to move my big bottle of gesso, and I'm using a flat brush. And what I like to do on edges is cast off the sides, and that keeps your edges nice and clean. So you're going from the inside of your piece to the outside, adding a light coat of paint. You don't want it real thick. It doesn't have to be perfect. You could add a little bit of water to it. It won't hurt. If you add too much water, the fibers are really going to absorb that water and they're going to swell. And we are going to sand this lightly in between, but it's going to make more work for you, because you'll have to sand more off, and then it'll look speckled, and then you'll want to, add an extra coat or two. So I'm going from the inside to the outer edge and just casting off. And then look how clean my edges come up. If you get a little, it's no big deal too. You could always let it dry and sand it, and that's no problem. And then the same thing on the frame. I'm going to put this aside, dampen my brush, and blot it. And then I'm going to start in the middle of the frame and pull out. So I'm going to go around like that first, and again, clean edge. I do all my edges like this. It's just easier to cast it off this way. And what happens is when the fibers absorb the water and the acrylic paint, this is an acrylic gesso, I forget if I said that or not, they dry and they somewhat freeze the fibers into place. It's as if you put these little hairs standing up and you put it in a freezer. And because it's acrylic, when you apply subsequent coats, it's not going to reconstitute and get wet again. Okay, see, now I did the outer edge, and now I'm going to come back and go toward the center from the middle. Not a lot of paint. See how little I'm using, or gesso, I should say. Now, it's your choice whether to go down into that area or not. As I said, since our ornaments are going to have the light base on them, and then the asphaltum I used as a shade, it's really your call, whether you want to have to paint that or not. And again, on this inner edge, you don't want to put too much paint. You don't want to have a thick coat of paint there, because it will interfere with the other layer being pushed into it a little bit. Because if you fill it up with paint, then it's not going to be able to push that into it. Okay? So, put a little more. where you could see a color difference. And this is drying already because acrylics dry really quick. So it shouldn't take too long. It shouldn't take too many coats. Try again not to get your paint up in the fair rule, but that's a rule for everything. Because once it's up in there, it's really hard to get it out, and that's what makes your brush wear and splay. Okay, so there's that. The inside is almost dry. I might put another coat on it. You could feel it's damp yet, but it's dry enough where it's not coming off. So what I think I'll do, since we're running on camera here, is put another little coat on there. But then, and we're far better off using thin coats than thick coats. You want several thin coats because it's going to give the paint a chance to dry completely and less likelihood of it gumming up. And you could see with thin coats, you don't get those deep brush strokes or anything like that. Okay? So I am going to come off the camera for a bit, rinse my brush, and then I will be back in a second when this is dry. There we go. Everything's all dry. I did use my hairdryer a little bit to speed it along, and you can see it's a little bit bumpy. That's where the fibers were raised. That's normal and that's expected. You could also see that because I didn't paint, everything just slides right in. Something that I wanted to point out on my pieces is to make sure you're aware where my entry drill hole is, because these are cut by hand, so they don't fit both ways perfectly, because I am not a machine. You know, it'll push down a little bit because they're close, but this is the proper way. When you get my pieces, I usually mark the back with reference lines like A or B to show where they line up. And this is also really important on the circles. You could see here where the entry line is, but that is where I had to drill the hole to insert the blade to make the inside cut. But it's not always quite apparent on both things, and usually there's a little pencil mark there. And what I do before I start painting, if I need it, is mark it on the inside and mark it on this outer part with your pencil so that you can paint the backs or whatever and not lose that reference point. So we're going to paint the backs later. Just a thought, because I've had people, and I've done, where I've painted it upside down, and then you're kind of stuck if the design is facing that way and it doesn't want to fit in the frame properly. You're kind of screwed, so you have to either sand it or do it over again. So anyway, now I'm going to take some very fine sandpaper. This is probably about 600 grit, and I'm just going to very lightly, let me put a paper towel down so I don't get grit on my desk. Very lightly just take a little bit of the top off and sand it. And you can see right away those little fibers come up. They look like speckled a little more. Now you may want to do this, don't push too hard, just use a very light pressure. You may want to do another coat of gesso on this, but I don't think it's necessary for this type of design because there's going to be a lot going on. So you do the same on the frame. Just knock down that, those fibers that have swelled up from the water and the paint, and wipe it down. And you could see it's very little speckled, but it should be fine. And the next thing we're going to do, I'm going to leave it with one coat. You'll see how it comes out. But, on my other ones, I think I did a couple of coats on them, but then I figured out it wasn't really necessary. So, the base coat that we're going to have for the ornaments is sand, and that's a real nice light tan. I figured that would give a nice vintage effect. And what I'm going to do is switch my water to my wet palette. I usually use a wet palette. I don't always use it when I'm doing big base coats because it's a lot of paint on there. And I could usually use a lid or plastic something or other. I'm going to use the same brush. You could use even a smaller one. This is a 3/4 inch flat. And it's going to be the same thing as we did with the gesso. We're going to wet the brush a little with clean water, blot it, pick up some paint on the end, and then go from the middle outward. And you could see, because we put the gesso down, that the paint is true to color. If I were to paint this on the regular MDF, it's going to dry dark and it's going to look dull. It's not going to be as true to the color as you may want. I also wanted to mention that the gesso from DecoArt comes in different colors. It comes in black, white, beige, gray, and I think like a green, like a mossy green. Most of the time I use white because using beige on MDF would definitely seal it, but it's not going to give you, any more brilliance in your colors. So see, there's the first coat. See how fast and easy. And same thing for the frame. Now this time when you put the paint down, it will stay smooth because the gesso sealed those fibers in, and the gesso does not reconstitute when you put the second coat on. And you could see I'm doing it exactly the same way, and you could see how nice it covers. And like I said, you could apply this to any type of project you do, this method. Outer first, and then we're going to go towards the inside edge. And this little line here does not have to be, perfect. You'll see when we start the shading process. And again, I'm using just a little bit of paint. If it looks streaky, don't worry about it. Let it dry, and then, you could just put another coat on it. If you keep adding thick coats, it's not going to look nice and even and flat. Okay? So you can see it's a little lighter there, which won't matter, but just for our purposes. Oops, I got an ouchie. A little clump. There we go. Okay? So I'm going to let that one dry. And once again, I will be back. Everything's all dry. I did use my hairdryer a little bit to speed it along, and you can see it's a little bit bumpy. That's where the fibers were raised. That's normal and that's expected. You could also see that because I didn't paint, everything just slides right in. Something that I wanted to point out on my pieces is to make sure you're aware where my entry drill hole is, because these are cut by hand, so they don't fit both ways perfectly, because I am not a machine. It'll push down a little bit because they're close, but this is the proper way. When you get my pieces, I usually mark the back with reference lines like A or B to show where they line up. And this is also really important on the circles. You could see here where the entry line is, but that is where I had to drill the hole to insert the blade to make the inside cut. But it's not always quite apparent on both things, and usually there's a little pencil mark there. And what I do before I start painting, if I need it, is mark it on the inside and mark it on this outer part with your pencil so that you can paint the backs or whatever and not lose that reference point. So we're going to paint the backs later. Just a thought, because I've had people, and I've done, where I've painted it upside down, and then you're kind of stuck if the design is facing that way and it doesn't want to fit in the frame properly. You're kind of screwed, so you have to either sand it or do it over again. So anyway, now I'm going to take some very fine sandpaper. This is probably about 600 grit, and I'm just going to very lightly, let me put a paper towel down so I don't get grit on my desk. Very lightly just take a little bit of the top off and sand it. And you can see right away those little fibers come up. They look like speckled a little more. Now you may want to do this, don't push too hard, just use a very light pressure. You may want to do another coat of gesso on this, but I don't think it's necessary for this type of design because there's going to be a lot going on. So you do the same on the frame. Just knock down that, you know, those fibers that have swelled up from the water and the paint, and wipe it down. And you can see it's very little speckled, but it should be fine. And the next thing we're going to do, I'm going to leave it with one coat. You'll see how it comes out. But, you know, on my other ones, I think I did a couple of coats on them, but then I figured out it wasn't really necessary. So, the base coat that we're going to have for the ornaments is sand. And that's a real nice light tan. I figured that would give a nice vintage effect. And what I'm going to do is switch my water to my wet palette. I usually use a wet palette. I don't always use it when I'm doing big base coats because it's a lot of paint on there. And I could usually use a lid or plastic something or other. And I'm going to use the same brush. You could use even a smaller one. This is a 3/4 inch flat. And it's going to be the same thing as we did with the gesso. We're going to wet the brush a little with clean water, blot it, pick up some paint on the end, and then go from the middle outward. And you could see, because we put the gesso down, that the paint is true to color. If I were to paint this on the regular MDF, it's going to dry dark and it's going to look dull. It's not going to be as true to the color as you may want. I also wanted to mention that the gesso from DecoArt comes in different colors. It comes in black, white, beige, gray, and I think like a green, like a mossy green. Most of the time I use white because using beige on MDF would definitely seal it, but it's not going to give you, you know, any more brilliance in your colors. So see, there's the first coat. See how fast and easy. And same thing for the frame. Now this time when you put the paint down, it will stay smooth because the gesso sealed those fibers in, and the gesso does not reconstitute when you put the second coat on. And you can see I'm doing it exactly the same way. And you can see how nice it covers. And like I said, you could apply this to any type of project you do. This method. Outer first, and then we're going to go towards the inside edge. And this little line here does not have to be, you know, perfect. You'll see when we start the shading process. And again, I'm using just a little bit of paint. If it looks streaky, don't worry about it. Let it dry, and then, you know, you could just put another coat on it. if you keep adding thick coats, it's not going to look nice and even and flat. Okay, so you can see it's a little lighter there, which won't matter, but just for our purposes. Oops, I got an ouchie, a little clump. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to let that one dry, and once again I will be back. After everything is dry on the base coats, the next thing we're going to do is stencil in the background. Now, what I decided to do on these was have a very subtle design. I'm hoping you can see it on the camera. Kind of a tone on tone that I did with the stencils. You can see that one has a diamond shape. This one has like writing. And this one has like a flourish, a filigree type design that's really pretty. So I think that added a lot of interest and it made it look old-fashioned. And I wanted to show you the stencils that I used. I like these M² stencils by Sandy Warner McTeer and Tracy Moore. They're available on both of their websites. They're really nice 6x6 sheets of stencil, and they fit on most projects. You can just line them up if your project's bigger. And I couldn't find a writing one there. Tracy said she'll work on getting one for me, but I think I got this from Patricia Rawlinson. But it's just like a writing, you know, they don't really put words in them, but it looks like writing, and I thought that looked cool too. I used that one on the kitty here. So that's also a 6x6, and I tend to, when I get stencils, I like to get something more general like this that will do a lot of different types of projects instead of getting something that's really specialized that you can only use for one type of project and then that's it. So I think for this piece I am going to use the flourish here. This is the M2-03 from the stencils, and as you can see, I don't always clean them after each one. What I do, this is why I don't like to glue these yet too, I just lay my ornaments flat, or if you have a flat one, and the color I'm going to use is antique white. Sand was the base, and you can see they're very close in tone, so this will give a nice subtle effect. The stencil brush that I'm using, I like dome brushes which don't have sharp edges. They're kind of rounded on the edge. This one is by Lori Spelt's Creative Coach, and it has almost like a natural feel to the bristles. This is a personal preference. It's not really a plasticky feel, and like I said, I like the dome edge because I feel for dry brushing and stenciling you can really get in the edges nice without having clumps. So that's kind of the goal, is not to have a clumpy looking stencil. And I'll bring my wet palette out, off my icky paint on the top. I always get the boogers that dry. And I will start with a dry brush. And again, these are a little bit softer, but they're very dense. You can see there's a lot of bristles there. So they do move around, and I like that a lot. I'm going to tap the tip of the brush in and kind of wiggle it, and you can see the paint came up maybe 1/4 of an inch. And then I'm gonna use a clean, sturdy paper towel, not a cheap one, because the cheap ones will start to tear apart. I think in the States they use Viva. I use the white shop towels. I don't like using the blue shop towels because I find that sometimes the blue comes off when you're doing this. Like if you're using a white stencil or white paint or light colored paint, you get color to come off, and I don't like that. And I find that also with some of my darker stencil brushes, actually. I used to think it was because I didn't clean the brush before, but it happens even with new brushes. So anyway, you could see the pile here is kind of damp, and I kind of worked the paint up into the bristles on the shop towel, paper towel. And I'm going to just lay the stencil where I think it's going to cover most of the area. Okay, this will be float shaded in that later. And I'll just start by lightly going round with it. Okay, you want to do a circular motion. You want to keep your stencil brush perpendicular to the surface, so 90 degrees-ish. You know, a little here and there doesn't matter. But that way the bristles aren't going to go underneath the stencil. And you want to keep the brush relatively dry because, again, if it's too wet, the paint will go underneath the stencil, and you don't want that to be. Plus, it really kind of makes it easy to clean up because there isn't much paint left on the stencil. Now, usually I turn the piece, but since I'm on the video, and again, this doesn't have to be perfect. You can kind of see where you got. You know, look for areas that you might miss a little, but we're going to be painting over this, so it won't matter too much. And then there you have it. Now you see it's a little lighter there. If you want to get real fussy, you could just put your stencil back on, put a little more. I did this with one load of paint, as you saw, because I think it's pretty much enough. But I think that'll work. Let's see, a little more on that side, if I don't lose my pattern. There. Like I said, the dots and the lines are going to be all on here anyway. There. That's good enough, isn't it? Now see what a difference that makes? It's really nice. It makes it interesting. We're going to let that dry a little bit, and then we will go on to the next segment. Thanks. Hold on, I'll be back in a minute. Alright, our stencil is dry. The next step in our project is to give it this shaded antique-y look. So in order to do that, we're going to use DecoArt's Asphaltum. It's a nice transparent darker brown, and it does a beautiful job for shading. I put a little bit on my palette. I have some clean water here. I call this my little water. I like to use two different waters. I have my big tub over on this side that I rinse my brushes on, and I keep this little container sitting on my wet palette for when I do things like float shade or thin paint, because then I'm always using some nice clean water. I'm not contaminating the paint with the dirty colors from the other tub. I like float shading with an angle shader, and I'm going to be using the Golden Natural line from Silver Brush. I love silver brushes. I use them all the time. They have different lines for different needs, and you don't have to use the Golden Natural, but it's nice for acrylic and watercolor. It's got more of a natural feel to the fiber, and it absorbs a lot of water. So it's good for watercolor too. It's one of my favorite brushes for shading because it gives nice soft lines with it. And what I do, I keep my water here, and I keep a clean paper towel, and I'm going to start on the center piece, and I'm going to pick up a little bit of paint and spread it on my palette to distribute it through the brush. You can see how it goes from dark to fade. Dark to fade, because there's water on this end of the brush. There's more paint on the tip. This is why I like to use an angle brush. I think that makes this step a little easier. A lot of people use flat brushes, which is fine. Whatever works for them is great. And you need a moist brush to do float shading, and when you blot your brush on the paper towel, you don't scrub it in because you're going to move that paint to the other end. You want to keep the heel of the brush as clean as possible. So you just touch it to the paper towel, and then I'm going to move this up. I'm trying to show you everything at once, so my hands might get in the way. I'm going to be float shading the edge, and you want to hold the brush perpendicular to the wherever you're shading and move your piece around, because your paint will be darker here then, and it will fade into the center as you float shade. You see how it's doing that? How easy? When I first started painting, and when I was teaching more, I used to teach to float shade on a popsicle stick to practice, because it helps you get this perpendicular movement. See what a beautiful float it is? There's a lot of paint on that side and it fades to nothing. You want to keep your brush a little bit damp because the paint has to move, and then as you pick it up you blend it a little on the palette, and you take several strokes to move it. You don't do this in just one stroke. You can see the first couple strokes are laying down the paint, and getting it wet, and that gives a vehicle for the pigment to move. And you could add more paint if you want it darker, and you kind of cast up so you're going to trail off that line instead of having a choppy place that stops. Okay, see how fast and easy? Now that's my little entry hole. Some people fill that in when they use my pieces. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. I'll be honest, I get lazy about it. So there you go. It's already done. Now we're going to move to the frame piece. And we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to start on the outside edge, and we're going to stay perpendicular and follow these curves. This will be a really good piece to show you how I do that. Start in a corner and kind of follow the piece up and around. And remember too, this can be done in 2 coats. Like, see how that's a little less even there? I could either go back now or come back with another coat. You could fill it in. And with the angle brush, it's nice. I can just kind of turn it if I just want the tip of the brush. Maybe I don't want the whole brush to drag on there, if I'm just adding a little more color. You know, these are the things that as you practice, you get the feel for it. And pretty soon you'll be doing these without even thinking about it. I keep my paper towel close because I'm always going back and forth blotting to it. And see how I'm just following around these curves. And sometimes it'll pull it out from areas, but you know, don't obsess about that, because as I said, you could go back and fix that up later. You can put another coat if you want it a little bit more profound. Pronounced, profound. You know, everything doesn't have to be done in one coat. And I think people, the more they understand that, the easier it's going to be. Especially with acrylics, because acrylics dry so fast. And All these pieces you can use a hair dryer if you want, or a heat gun. Just watch on heat guns, you know, if you have for like rubber stamps, you know, to do your embossing and stuff. Heat guns run extremely warm, so be sure to move the dryer a lot and keep it further away from your piece, because you don't want to cook the piece depending on what it is. You don't want the paint to bubble. You don't want to do things too fast. Painting's supposed to be relaxing. There we go. That was easy. Now the next thing we'll do is this inside edge. And I will start maybe here. And now see where it's a little rough there? That is where the base coats of the gesso and the sand tapered off. But they're going to be filled in on the next step, so they don't have to look beautiful. And I'm hoping you can see how these colors complement each other and look nice and old-fashioned. I wanted something vintage looking. And as I said, I like the soft contrast of the stencil color with the background color, and then what makes it look striking is the black silhouette on there. It really makes it stand out, and the black line work and the dots and, you know, all the rest of the designs that we're going to be putting on there. Everything is about layers and steps when you're painting. See how I just come back over here and do a little bit there? Now see? And the inside looks kind of crummy, but we're going to deal with that very quickly. You could darken any areas you want. And we're going to let that dry, and I will be back one more time. Well, more than once, but I will be back. Everything's dry now, and while I think I might do another shade around the outside and inside edge, I first am going to do the actual edges, this inside edge and the outside edge here. Now for the inside edge, I'm going to use the asphaltum and continue this down. For that, I would like to use a stiffer brush and a flat, or you could use, I also do edges when I use a stencil type brush, because the bristles are stiff and I can tap it into place without going over the edge. But for this, since it's going to go into this part, I'm going to use the Ruby Satin Silver brush. This is a size 10. It's just a flat brush, and it's a bit different from the Golden Natural in that it has more synthetic feel to the bristles. They're a little bit stiffer, which is going to give more control. They don't need to hold as much paint for long painting lines like floating in water, and they stay pretty nice and chisel edge, so you do get that control with them. This is another line of the brushes that I use all the time from Silver, the Ruby Satin. They all have this type of bristle. I do use them for floating in that, the angle, when I really need precision where I want to float. An edge is kind of an easy float, so I use a softer brush, but if I want more precision, I use them. And they're another of my favorite brushes. As you well know, there's no one line of brush that does everything for us, so we need a couple lines of our favorites to do different tasks that we're doing. So I'm going to load this with the asphaltum. You can't really see it, but what I'm going to do is take the brush and just kind of tap and meet up with that line. Now you could go either direction. You could go inward or outward. And it's going to look a little mottled. We're not going for full coverage there. I'm using a little bit of water in there. And I don't have to go all the way down to the bottom really, because when the centerpiece is sitting in there, you're only going to see half of it anyway. So it's just my own sense of neatness at this point. But since this is a dark color that we're putting on here, I didn't feel the need to have to bring the gesso down here and, you know, mess with the edge like that. Like I said, a lot of the edges that I do anyway are shaded. They're dark. And I don't use I used to do the edges with the base coat color. And then I found I was doing that, and then I would just have to go over it and shade it anyway. So it was kind of like a waste of time a little bit. Now see, that little line in there is from the router bit when I route the pieces, and it's of no consequence. You're not going to worry about that because once the piece is locked in place, you're not going to see it. But it's kind of good there because it can hold some of the glue for you. So I'm going to keep going around. It's a little tedious because depending how many you're doing, this is the time when you put a movie on and paint to that or something, or listen to an audiobook, or put your favorite music on. For me, you could hear the cars going by. I close the windows even though it's warm in here because we live not too far from the highway, and it is Saturday afternoon and people are out and about. So I wanted to get this done though during daylight, so you either get good light and have to put up with a little bit of cars, or the lighting wouldn't be as well. But there we go. So there's the inside done. And if I put this in, this is almost dry. You could see it gives that nice little mottled antique look like the kitty one has. And that is with the asphaltum. And I put that one aside again and rinse my brush. And now for the outer edge, I wanted a darker color. I didn't want it to look as mottled. I wanted it more neat, and I wanted it more neat. I don't know if that's right. I wanted it neater, and I wanted it darker and a solid coverage. So I decided to go with soft black on that. I thought the black would be too stark. And as I said, the asphaltum was a little bit transparent, so the soft black is a good answer for what we wanted to achieve here. Now you could use the same brush, dampen it, pick up paint, which I know you can't see. And now since I'm more concerned about the front than the back with this, because I'll probably do the back with soft black when I'm done, I'm going to pull from the middle of the piece to the front and let the brush, kind of like we did the base coating on the front. If you hold the brush up a bit, it won't go over the edge, and if it does seep over, like that little bit there, you can just wipe it. And I am going to float this one more time too. So you're kind of just tapping and pulling. And we're going to do the same thing going the other way to do the back. You don't have to be as neat. You could probably practice if you want to go the back first. Go towards the back first. And we're just going to lean it up here See how nicely that covers. I'm not putting too much water in there. And by holding it, my elbows are on the desk, and I'm just kind of flicking the paint, trying not to move the piece while it's not going to let me push down and make that a mess in the front. It's going to come out really nice and neat. And if there is a little lip, which I did it too perfect, if there is a little lip of the light color that you put on the front of the piece, it will cover it easier, because we're putting, like here, you could see it kind of moved off it, and then you could just go with a second coat and blend it. Depends how fussy you want to be. These are not fussy ornaments, as I said. They're fun. So I'm going to finish this up. I don't know if you need to watch me do the whole thing on camera. It's not exciting. I'm going to go around the ornament, and then I'm going to go around the back side of it. Say I went around. I'll do it that way. And then I'm going to go toward the back. And now see, the brush is still pretty clean. We're not slapping it on the brush. We're not using that much paint. If we need more, it's better to go for a second coat rather than try to slap it on all at once. Okay? And that will give us a beautiful clean edge, and we will be ready to move on. One final thing before this section's over is we are not going to paint this edge at this time. Okay? So leave that edge alone, and we'll do that after the thing is glued. Okay? So I will be back as soon as this is done, and we'll move on. We got another float to do and a couple more things, and we're getting close. Now everything is dry and my edges are all done. So yay on that. And once again, I'll put this centerpiece away. And as I look at this, I do believe that I refloated it with a little bit of soft black to give it just a deeper look on the edge. So I am once again going to take my soft golden natural brush and load it up with a little bit of soft black on the tip, just a little. And this is where edges come in easy, because you could just skate across it. See how it intensifies that just a little bit? It just makes it look older. And I'm mostly doing it on the outer part of the piece, the bumpy parts. We'll put it that way. So I'm kind of skating over the corners there, and then skating over the bumps. See, I'm not getting in too much because I don't want it to look mucky, but see how now that it's upside down, see how this half looks more intense than that half. It's very subtle. It's another thing about painting. It's these subtle little differences that make a good piece into a really great piece. It's never usually the in-your-face things. That looks much nicer, I think. Plus it'll even out those asphaltum floated edges that you didn't feel you got in right. There we go. That's all. Not a lot. Now I'm not going to do that on this edge because it would make it look dirty. And what we want is when we put the black in, we want a beautiful contrast. We want it to be, you know, stunning. That's what makes them look so cool. Okay, so that part's done. I'm going to rinse out my brush. And now the next thing I want to show you is how I do the little dots and the scrolls. Now for my dots, they're going to be in black, and I have a larger stylus. You know, styluses come in all colors, all sizes and colors, as you can see. I got colors on the brain. I do believe this is probably about the same size. You could even use, in a pinch, the back end of your paintbrush, but you don't want too big of dots. You want them to be kind of, you know, just, you want it to look like beading, like old-fashioned beading. So what we're going to use for that is lamp black, which I will have to go get in a minute. I thought I had it on my tray here, so hang on and I will go get it. The magic of video. There's my lamp black. I thought I pulled it and had it sitting on my desk, and I did not. So what I am going to do, turn my tray around so I get a clean area. Put a little bit of lamp black on there. And then I am going to start painting my beading, my dots. And in the pattern, I'm going to have the dots there, but I don't think that you should really have to transfer them if you don't want to. I hate transferring the pattern. That's like my worst part. So what I did, I will do it up here in the middle, is I started with 4 dots. At the 4 spots there. Okay, now the trick is going to be not to stick your hand in this. Do we think we can do that? Probably. Then we're going to start dividing them. So I'm going to move down a little because this is the middle between that, right? And I'm going to pull it down. I'm not going to go straight into it because it'll be closer to the top because the way the piece is set up. So I'm going to just kind of eyeball it and divide that. And it doesn't have to be perfect. And then I'm going to divide this again. And then divide it again. And divide it again. Okay? Same here. We're going to divide it here. I'm going to divide it here. And I'm going to divide it there. Move your piece. Same thing. We'll go from here to about, I would say there. Divide it. Divide it. See how fast? Who wants to waste their time tracing these dots? Right? It makes a mess. So we'll keep going. This one we're going to move it up toward the middle a little. Same thing. This is very therapeutic for those of you who want some Zen. I guess that's why people do mandalas, right? Because it's just repeating patterns. You don't have to think as hard. That's why I do my embroidery. There's a lot of people like Keith doesn't understand how I could do such intricate embroidery, but it's one stitch at a time. And it's really, to me, it's very relaxing. You know, painting's relaxing too, but painting requires water and, you know, we can make a mess, but stitching is kind of neater. there we go. Now that looks pretty good, you gotta admit. And then I will just do this, which I shouldn't, but for the camera I will. And then I am gonna turn off the camera and let it dry, because I don't want to stick my finger into it. Oh, I just saw something though. I might as well do these dots here. There's 7 in each piece, I believe. And we'll let them dry too. They're just at the corners where everything, at the main points of the piece, right? And then you go make yourself a cup of tea, or have a cookie, or go do the dinner dishes, or something. And stay away from this until these dots are dry, or you will regret it and make a smeary mess. And I can tell you this from my own experience. So there we have it. Couldn't be easier, right? We're getting there. All we have to do are the swirls and the figure, and we're gonna do an owl in a tree. So that'll be cool. Okay, I'll be back when these are dry. We'll see you in a bit. Alright, the dots are completely dry. I am sure of this because I did this 2 days ago. It was getting dark and it was going to rain, so I decided to, stop my video for a little while, and I'm getting back to finishing it up now. But that's a good way to know the dots are dry. It doesn't hurt to leave them overnight. As I said, it's very frustrating when they smear. The next step we're going to do, and that'll be the end of finishing up the frame part, are these little scrolls. Now, as you can see, I wasn't really fussy on them, and I hope you aren't either. I don't think it matters. I think it's good practice just to kind of wing it, and to be honest with you, I wouldn't even trace the lines, though the lines will be in the pattern. I'm going to put them in there for you. I just think it's easier to kind of freehand them, and once you get going, they're quite easy. You just follow the contour of the piece. Now, of course, if you have a different shaped piece, you'll want to trace the lines maybe. The brushes that I'm going to use on these are the Silver Ruby Satin, and I spoke of these earlier. They're a firmer bristle, but they're more synthetic. They almost feel like a fabric brush. And these are the monogram liners, and I like them because of the length of the bristles and also the stiffness for stuff like this. They're a little bit shorter than traditional monograms, so you get a little bit more control. And also the fact that that the bristles are stiff give you a bit more control too, because we want to be able to control these lines yet have enough paint in the brush that it's going to complete, each of the designs. So these are the 0, the 1, and the 4. I'm going to start with the middle one. We'll see how it goes. I haven't, I forgot what I used actually. I usually just grab them. I'm going to do my line work here with lamp black paint. I put it on my wet palette, and you can see it's kind of spreading because the palette's wet. And I'm getting it like not quite an ink consistency, but a little bit thinned. Not too thin. You don't want it to spread like this on your piece, which it shouldn't. It's just because it's on wet paper. But you want to do it where there's a little bit. I think I'm going to switch this to this side so I don't put my hand in it, because I want to try to stay in the frame. So I'm going to have to keep going over here. I hope you don't mind. And I'm going to pick up some paint, fill my brush so it's good and full. and then you could start it anywhere you want. I'm going to start at the top here, and I'm going to just make this little almost horseshoe shape and curl it around. Now I find the hardest part are the curls on this type of thing, and that's where we start them all and then we taper off. But by the time you get through the piece, they will become easier, I promise you. It's just a matter, like any stroke work, of practicing. You could use a shorter brush if you want. I have the Micron mini series, the Ultra Minis, and though these don't seem very much shorter, but you could use a shorter brush and you don't have to do it all in one stroke if you don't want. But we're going to try it here. And what I do is I'll start here, come around, and kind of exaggerate. And I'm bringing it to the dot. Okay? And you could always put in another stroke and kind of even it out like that. Okay? So we're always going to be working towards the dots. Okay? So I'm going to skip this because it's easier to do it all in one direction at first, especially. I'm going to start here, kind of follow around. And as we get to the dot, I'm going to kind of lift. Okay? Now you could go over these as well. And let's see, I'm going to start here. And lift. Now see, I'm leaving my arm anchored. Okay? And I'm just moving. It's hard to do this in the camera without my hand getting in the way. So I'm trying to do it where I'm not right over it. The easiest way to do these curls actually is to go perpendicular over them and not have your arm suspended in the air like mine is right now. When you have something to rest on, it works a lot better. So I load it up, making sure I'm doing it right. Yes. And I'm going to start here, curve it up, and pull. Okay, so that half is done. Now we're going to reverse this to do the other other 4. And again, we'll start here almost perpendicular, curve it, and then lift as you get close to the dot. Okay? Pick up some more paint. Start here. Follow the edge. And lift. Now see, you might want to bring these around a little more, as I said. Just makes them look a little fancier. Turn your piece, load, see, that one went fast and easy. Because even me, once you get warmed up, and see, that doesn't really have a big curl, so you could add it in. And one more. I'm going to move up a little here. I hope you could see this. And pull. And then just match the other one. Okay? Now see, when you look at the overall piece, I'm rinsing my brush, it looks beautiful. So they might not be like perfect, but they're good. and once you paint the picture in them, the overall look is going to be really nice. Okay, so all we have to do is our silhouette, and I will be back in a minute. I'm going to let this dry. Alright, this is dry on the edges, and I am going to put this piece aside. The last bit of painting we're going to do on the ornaments that's decorative is painting the silhouettes. And these are very simple, fun little silhouettes. So there's not a lot to that, but I figure I show you anyway since I went this far on the video. Now for doing this type of work, I like the silver ultra minis, and they're very precise brushes. They're really nice for all this little tiny work like this. This is a 12-0 angle. I don't know if you can see, it's a little angle brush. It's nice to get in corners. This is the 12-0 pointed round. It will do the lines, you know, the little ears and things. And then this is the lettering brush, which is a bit longer, and it might be nice for these long branches. You don't have to get them all, obviously, but, you know, you use whatever works for you. You might want to stick with the ruby ones, and they might work fine for you. They'll work for me, too. I don't know. I could show you with either or. Like I said, there's more than one way, and there's more than one brushes. That's why I usually keep different lines of brushes to see what's going to work for me best. I think to start out and do like the tree trunk part, I'm going to use the ruby satin ones and the owl because they're bigger areas. And there's no great surprise or technique to this. It's very simple. You dampen your brush. Pick up some paint, and we go to town painting on it. This is a tree. This is going to be an owl in a tree. And obviously I didn't do the sample yet. This is the sample for the pattern. So I'm learning. I used to have to do everything a few times. And it might be good to start on the tree. I like to start on the non-precise things, pretty much. And I just painted the main lines there, and you can just go off how you want. As I said, I'll have the pattern lines there, but, you know, it's a tree. You could add as many branches as you want. Most of these silhouettes will only take probably one coat, though you might want to coat certain areas. And this brush, it's thick enough to hold a lot of paint, so I don't have to keep loading, but it's also thin enough to make the branches, you know, taper. You just get things to taper by kind of pulling off pressure. But see how fast I used a thicker brush so I could fill this in quick. Because this is not like rocket science. You don't have to worry much about this. I'm going to add another branch or two. And then this is the ground. And I decided to put a little pumpkin here. Why not, right? If you guys started your pumpkin spice frenzy yet for the year, it's very hot today. I have it closed up. You could hear the traffic going by. That's the only bad part of doing these during the day. As I said earlier, I think I said that the other day in the video. There we go. I live in the country, but I live sort of by a highway, and usually it's quite quiet here, but certain times of the day It can be busy. Then we're going to paint the owl in. As I said, these are very basic shapes. And it just goes to show how you could have such nice designs from basic. Everything doesn't have to be fancy and complicated. It's why I like teaching once in a while. It seems like I haven't had a lot of time to do my own patterns lately. I've been cutting so much wood and doing a lot of other things, but it's nice to teach once in a while, here at Toll Town especially, because it forces me back into the design mode, and then I make time for doing some designs. So that's his head, this is his shoulder. And he had a wing going there. Okay. Put another little branch. I'll put that in my water bin. And then what I think I am going to do is take one of the little brushes and just for some detail, add some little squigglies. Okay. You could add some branches off of here if you want thinner, because as you get further out on trees, the branches usually get thinner. So you could fill them in as much as you want. I think that's plenty. I don't want it to look out of balance with the rest of the other designs. We don't want them floating in the air. So here we go. What I'm going to do, hold on, I have to grab some paint. No, I guess not. I thought I had my, here it is. I need my soft black. I'm sorry, I thought I had it out. And I'm just going to take a little bit of that. Use an angled brush, my soft angler again. Pick up a little soft black and black mixed. And I'm going to float some ground there. I did that with a few of these designs because even though they're casual designs, they need something. Sorry that's so loud. Something to sit on. Now see the big difference that makes. And what I did there, the black would have been too strong, the brown would not have been strong enough to give a little shadow. Is when I picked up the paint, I dampened my brush, put it in the soft black, and then just tipped it in the black and kind of mixed it on the palette. And it makes this beautiful deep shade that's like a blackish brown and nice and transparent. Okay, so that pretty much finishes the design. I'm going to let this dry a couple minutes, and then I will do the backs and we'll glue them together. Even though it's simple, I'm so sorry about the traffic, it just bothers me. Even though they're quite simple to do, I thought that I'd show you anyway. Okay, so I'll let that dry a few minutes and then I'll be back to finish it. All right, we're in the home stretch now. We're just going to finish the backs. As I say, my ornaments are not glued yet. I can show you that when I'm done painting. And I want to finish this just in solid black. So for that step, I'm going to use my flat shader again. I'll bring up my palette so you can see what I'm doing. And we're going to do it exactly how we did the initial base coating, only using black paint. So for the frame, I'm going to start in the middle of the piece and cast it out. And you could get in there later with a little brush. I suggest not trying it now when things are wet. I would do it later on. And I'm picking up a little bit of water at a time, not too much, but enough to move the paint. I'm going to set it on the surface so it doesn't bounce as much. And since we already did the edges in the soft black, we don't have to worry about picking up our piece or turning it. You just got to be reasonably careful. And you could kind of see if you missed any corners. So once you do the outside, you go back and do the inside, just as we did the initial base coat with the sand colored, the light tan. Sorry. I always get froggy when I do my videos. And if you do get paint on your thumb or whatever, just be careful when you're touching the face of the design till it dries. There we go. So that's one. Now again on this, we're not going to do the side yet. We will do that after it's glued. And that way the glue will not only stick better, get the cat hair out of there. The glue will not only stick better, but it will also allow the piece to fully seat into the frame piece. Where sometimes if you get paint or if the MDF or your wood swells a little bit from the water in the paint, it just won't push in as far. It's not tragic, but we like it to do nice. Okay, so that is that. See how quick? Let's let this dry again one more time, and then we'll glue it up. Everything's dry, and there is our beautiful ornament ready to be glued. These are very simple pieces to glue. I have a lot of people ask. I do have a video on my YouTube channel showing me how I glue the Lynn Andrews 12 Days ornaments, and this is the same process, but I figure I'll show you again since you're all here. You can use any clear drying wood glue. You're not going to get a lot of wear on this. Once it's in there, it's going to pretty much stay in there, so you don't need a lot of glue. I guess that's the biggest thing that I want to, emphasize when showing you how to do this. You don't have to put a big bead of glue everywhere that's going to make a mess. I like these little glue bots, they're called. They're little glue bottles, and the glue goes down and up, and it tends to stay pretty nice. And you can replace the tips. They have a pinpoint tip, and they have this little slot tip, and I kind of like the slot one. The tips come out and you can clean it and replace them. I think Amazon has them now. I used to get them at Lee Valley Tools, but I don't find them there often. This is a small one, and that's plenty because I don't do big time gluing. But what we're going to do, since the edge is beveled down, we want to glue the back of this inside edge. And you can see where the paint wasn't too even there, and I told you not to worry about it, and that's because there is no reason to worry about it. It's not going to be seen. That's the part that gets the glue. And I usually tilt it a little and come from the back, and as you can see, I just put little little kind of dots. I'm not getting every spot. I'm going to try to do this where the camera can see this easily. Really, less is more on this. You really don't want to overdo this. Because, see, that's a lot for there. So you could take the bottle and kind of smear it through. You don't have to hit every part, because nobody's going to be sitting on it or leaning it or anything like that. Let's see. There we go. So you could help it with your finger, whatever, just to get the bumps out. And then, whoops, there goes my mat. Be sure that you have it in the right orientation. And what I do a lot of times, I'll set it like this so I can grab it, and then just try to drop it through clean and give a little push. And you could see a little bit of glue came out there. So what I do is I add have a cotton tip or a damp paper towel and just wipe it. You could still see the glue, but it's clear drying. And then the same on the back. You could see how little glue I lost or messed. Okay, that is all there is to it. That will stay, and as you can see, all that area that looked crappy is hidden, and then we're going to come back and just paint the back area here and finish up. Our glue is dry, and we're ready to finish the last of the painting. Again, I'm going to just use black and the same brush. The brush is damp and it's pretty easy. We're just going to, turn your piece on the side and fill in that area with the black. Now, if you want to put a little design or stencil on the back or something like that, that's fine to do after. I like to paint it solid first, no matter what I'm doing on the backs. And this way you could touch up anything else that needs to be touching up as well. So there you go. And front looks good, back looks perfect. And to me, that's the easiest way to do it, this two-step way. So I'm going to leave this here to dry, put it off to the side, and I'll bring out my other groupings so you can see them again. There's the raven on the skull, there's the kitty, there's the chandelier, the headless horseman, Miss Witch on a broom, and we painted the owl. So that is going to be the set that's in the pattern. And I sell these ornaments separately because I like using the different shapes, and putting them in a set makes people have to do a certain thing with them, so they're easier to go separately. So they're available on my site if you're interested in getting these pieces to do. And I thank you for watching, and I did want to show you, if you like my Halloween things, this is another new pattern that I'm going to be putting up very shortly on my website. And this is a garland, or you can use wire and hang these on a Halloween tree or a wreath or a door or whatever. So that's going to be my other new pattern. You're welcome to come to my site at tollpaintingdesigns.com and look at all my surfaces and patterns, and I have surfaces from a lot of other designers too. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy it. If you have any questions, all my contact information is available to you, and I do answer my emails. Email's probably the best for me at SheilaLandryDesigns@gmail.com. I check it every day, and I'm very happy to answer you. Thanks for watching.